get started, we're going to stick to the sort of lightning format for this presentation, or the dork shorts format. So these will be kind of like 10-minute presentations. If you hit the 10-minute mark, I will rudely interrupt at that point, just to say, hey, we're at the 10-minute mark. If you could wrap up your comments, to make way for the next team. I will try to be the timekeeper there. And we did reorder the presentation. I just right before we joined, I moved some slides around so that we could put the Denison folks up front, given the other, I think, conflicting presentations that you have this morning. So without, I guess, further ado, we'll go through the presentations, and then we'll follow it up, if we have time, with just a little, reflective discussion at the end about each other's work, about your experiences this week, about what comes next, and which I know is part of the individual presentations, but we'll go from there. So I'm going to try to watch the chat as well. Maybe Heather and I can kind of tag team that in case there are. Okay, just looking. Okay, good. Glad to hear folks are so far feeling like things are going okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I will turn it over to the first presenter, which is going to be, or the first project, which is going to be America as an Arab American Narrator Views It, from Hanada Almasri, Cheryl Johnson, Debbie Andriadis, Maddie Baker, and Eric Brannigan. So I'll be the slide advancer here. So just as you're talking, when you're ready for me to flip over, just give me the cue to advance, and I'll be happy to do that. Okay, so Hanada, whoever wants to take the lead, please feel free, and we'll go from there.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Ben and Heather, for all the hard work. I'll have to admit, you took us by surprise. We were psychologically prepared to present the last team based on the slides, but it's okay. Yeah. All right. So as you all know, our project is about America, Arab Americans, narrators views it, and basically it's painting the picture and understanding the context of the first wave of Arab Americans who came to the United States in the 19th century. So our project is based on a single narrative, and that would give us a great opportunity for students to listen to the commoner's view and then compare that with documentation and research in comparison to the scholarly work in the field. So for our team goals for this week, we managed to decide on the interview platform. We had two projects, if you remember, so part A and part B. So part A is conducting the interviews and creating the digital record. And part 2 is using this to remodel a class for the spring. And so we managed to decide on all platforms used for part 1. And you'll hear more about this. And I'll have to say, we decided to present as a team. So you will hear from my other team members as well, more details on that. We defined team roles and paid a lot of attention to student roles in terms of interviewing techniques, forming questions for the interviews, the content. We also talked about their roles as teaching assistants in the spring and what are the expectations. And one of the things that we've agreed on that we will use our TA students as models for students in the spring. And so after creating the digital archive, they will be doing their own Scholar book as a means of representation. So it will be a different content from what students will be using, but it will be a nice way first to acknowledge their hard work, but also to model for other students. We also determined if this is a public or private project. So we were in communication with our narrator, and luckily she agreed to have that as a public facing, and therefore we decided on going on with our IRB process. We finished developing the consent form, and then we're in the process of doing the release form as well. And finally, we decided on the project timeline and exact times for the interview sessions. That will be 6 in total. Next, and I'll give it to Maddie now.
Hi, so I'm going to go through the learning objectives of the two different parts of our project. So part 1 is to create a digital record documenting the context surrounding the first wave of Arab immigrants in the 19th century. We'll be doing this, as Nana mentioned, through a testimonial narrative through our subject who's Jackie. And then we'll move to compare that subject's narrative to those of other Arab American stories, both contemporary ones and historical. And then our final learning objective for this part was for Eric and I as students to research and demonstrate effective interview skills we've just started using IRB training, and we're going to further develop those. And then so the second part of the project is implementing our research into Hanada's class, which is Culture of the Arab World, and this will take form in a variety of different tasks, so mainly through a digital exhibit for the students, which will discuss the interviews that we found, and then they'll relate back to the themes of the class.
And then we're going to talk about hi. Is everybody hearing me? So I was going to talk about the assessment portion of the course. So part of the assessment will be actually creating a map for the Arab neighborhood in New York, where the narrator was first assimilated. Her family was first assimilated into the United States. And then the students will do synopsis of the interviews. So all of this will be scaffolding for the final project. So they'll also do some annotation of the times and places on a timeline. They'll create some textual analysis and then create all of that into a digital exhibit using Scalar, and then they'll do the reflection paper on that. And I believe Cheryl is now going to take over.
So we will be using Zoom for recording these interviews, and we had the students practice with Debbie to find out what will work best with the settings for doing a good filming of this. And they decided on which view they're going to record. We also have decided that with the spring course, we will split the class in two. So Group A will work on producing a timeline based on their research using Timeline.js, and then Group B will use the Google Tour Builder to show the migration pattern of our narrator's family, and also can overlay a tour that shows general immigration patterns for this first wave. We'll be using Voyant for our textual analysis that Debbie had referred to on the previous slide. And then finally, for the digital exhibit work, they will be taking what they have done step by step of looking at those recordings, those Zoom recordings, the timeline, the tour builder, Voyant information, and creating that digital exhibit using Scalar. So we have a link there, and that should fly us off to one of the projects. We looked at, Debbie provided several projects. So this is the kind of thing that we have in mind for the students to create, and we'll provide a model that our two interviewers will show in the spring. So they'll have something like this to show the class so that they can then model their digital exhibit after this. So a lot of textual information, images, we'll be adding in video sections that the two interviewers, our two student interviewers, have done. Thanks. So we can go on back, yep, and next steps.
Well, moving forward, we decided to split it into two parts, as Professor Al-Masri already mentioned. And part A will concern solely the interview portion itself, while part B will focus on the class aspect. So, to moving forward with part A, uh, we're going to try to refine a lot of our interview techniques and questions and get a solid background, as it says, on the research and the context of her experiences, and trying to get the IRB certification and information so that we can conduct this human research in a proper way, and to send the consent form so that we make sure that our subject is fully aware of what her testimony will be used for and such. You can move on.
Okay, so in order to organize ourselves, we are using the Google Drive. This is something that worked really well with our previous Arab American project. So this is just a screenshot of the organization that we have started for this particular CODEX project. We divide everything up into the appropriate folders, and then we can share individual folders with classes over time, and then remove those sharing permissions as necessary. So it gives us the kind of flexibility and provides us with a historical record as things develop and we decide we want to go maybe in a different direction. Then we can create a new subfolder and add the materials in there, but we're preserving everything long term, which then we can share with others our techniques, and things like our consent form. We have it all recorded and saved up on the Google Drive within the shared drive area, and makes it very convenient so we're not hunting things down that have scattered to the winds. And that's all we have to say about our project. Thank you for listening.
That's
Thank
amazing.
you, team. You rock. Thank you all.
That's amazing, and right on time too. I started my clock a little late, but you literally ended on 1 second left. So well done, and amazing. That project sounds great. I was going to say too. Hopefully, we'll have some questions for the teams, but we'll maybe save those to the end just to make sure we get through everyone's talks. Okay, so moving on. I think the next. Thank you very much, Hanada and Cheryl and Debbie and Eric and Maddie. That was great. Moving on, I think we're going to move on to mapping identity across the Ottoman Mediterranean world with Hoda Youssef, Trent Edmonds, Donnie Sindelbach, and AJ Ugarte.
Good morning, everyone. First, thank you all for putting up with my many questions and my many inquiries all week. I've really learned a lot from this project and learned a lot about what I want to do for this project. So I've really appreciated having the Institute, and I've really appreciated having my team, who has been just phenomenal. So we've been working this week on, I've taught a class many years ago on the Ottoman Mediterranean. And this, in this coming iteration, what I'd like to do is add a digital project. So the original idea is to just add one little project. And the project that I wanted to build the digital project around is analyzing a primary source. And my pain point from previous iterations of this class is that the primary sources are very technical. They include a lot of dates and places, and there's a lot of stuff happening in these texts. And students, I find, have a hard time really grappling with the text and spending some time with the text. So that was sort of the main idea of moving it into a digital project. So in terms of our goals for the week, we had quite a few, and we've gone through quite a lot of it, which is fantastic. We wanted to define the learning goals for the project, which we've done, and we'll see on the next slide. We've drafted the assignment. The assessments is still up in the air, so we're still working on the assessments, but the assignment is pretty much fleshed out, which is fantastic. We figured out the best mapping options for this project, so we're going to go with ArcGIS for this iteration, but we're not really wedded to the tool. It's really just using some sort of mapping technology, but we've decided on ArcGIS for this iteration. We've created a prototype, which is super ugly, but it is done, which is fantastic. And we'll show you some of those screenshots. And then lastly, the bonus idea that I was thinking about was, could I possibly expand this into a full course, right? Using a bunch of different digital technologies, and that is absolutely possible. There's a lot that I could do and that students could really do to expand this out as a project. So I'm very excited about that as well. So that was team goals. In terms of the learning objective, again, just for this particular assignment that they're going to be doing, is I wanted them to learn how to conduct a close reading of a primary source document. I wanted them to have to deal with and grapple with the ambiguities in the historical record, right? People just appear right out of nowhere, sometimes in texts. They don't tell you the dates, right? So there's a lot of ambiguities. They're not data, like perfect data, the way we might want them to be. I wanted them to learn how to approach research and analysis as an iterative process. So to go back to the text over and over and over again, and to really think about things in more than one pass through, basically. I want the students to be able to identify new patterns in the historical sources using the digital tools. And so this learning objective is really about how the digital tools are not the objective is not to create some beautiful map. The objective is to use these maps to identify new things in the sources. And then finally, to visually express data and information using mapping tools. So there was an assessment thing. So I put this up here. Again, this is all a little bit half-baked. But the main thing that I've gotten out of this week in terms of assessment is I've begun to think of the assignment as layers, just as you would think of sort of map layers. There are factual things that you can draw from these sources, right? Dates, places, people, right? So I'm thinking about sort of making that one part of the assignment, figure out what facts you can draw from this text. Then with history, you need to know the context in order to make sense of anything, right? What was going on politically? Where were other people? What were the trade routes? There's all sorts of other stuff that's happening around a text. So that's a contextual layer that I'll be asking them to do some research on. And then finally, which is sort of what I want to get them to, which is an analytical layer, like thinking about, okay, now that I've seen where this person says they've been, and I have seen where the context is around them, what kind of conclusions can I draw about this text based on that? So that's sort of how I'm thinking about the assignment. The technical mapping is not really the goal of this assignment. So we're going to be assessing basically effort rather than output there. There will be a final analytical essay, which is going to be sort of, a standard essay. Again, the idea is that all of this is sort of helping them think through their analysis of the source. There's going to be group work. I don't know how that's going to look yet. We'll see. So that's up in the air. And then we've talked quite a bit about a post-assignment reflection on sort of thinking about the learning goals. And so we've been thinking about that. So I'll turn it over to AJ, who'll talk about our digital prototype.
Yeah. So it's very interesting working on this project. When we first started, reading the primary source first time was very enlightening, but it was also very scary because I started reading it and I was like, how the hell am I gonna be able to extract information, like good information out of this text? Because it wasn't that the text didn't have good information, but it was just, I didn't know what could be classified as good information in order to map out exactly what it is that we wanted to map out. And I think that's the beauty of metadata, that there isn't a real way of there's not a structured way of doing it. And so it can be free form. We put up an example of what my initial spreadsheet looked like when I was pulling out information. It seems very complicated, but somehow it makes sense to me. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of have to like put a focus into the project, is we gotta let students know that like there isn't a very solidified way of doing this. And as long as you're able to get the information that you need out of the text and you have it in such a manner that you can put it into software like ArcGIS, then that's what's the important part. It's not a matter of it making sense to somebody else on a spreadsheet, but that it makes sense later on when you go to put it onto ArcGIS, for instance. And this project was very unique because, as to other projects that I've worked on in the past, like as I was reading and as I was rereading, there'd be things where I'd be like, oh wow, I should have kept track of this, and I should have been taking notes on this because this might be really important. And I think that's the beauty of this project. It's a lot of free form and like free thinking on the spot, while also having that very analytical layer towards it. And then I'll pass it off to Trent to talk about the actual mapping itself.
Okay, so this is the very ugly prototype map that we did as a run through. As Hoda mentioned, we were going to use ArcGIS Online for a couple reasons. At least initially, it's accessibility to students. They can all get to it. And plus, you know, it could be as complicated as we wanted to make it on the back end, and the students don't necessarily have to use that part. So base maps and things like that we could provide that can underlay the things that they want to use. So we used the data that AJ had scraped from the close reading, and we just ran a test of ArcGIS Online about this, and we maybe made it through, I think, 7 at the most rows of data. And as we're going through the rows, we're talking about it with AJ and what he found. You know, and then we talk about the places, and we had to go find those places that don't exist on a modern map necessarily. And that's why you'll see in the data some longitude and latitude where we find them on other maps. And it was really interesting as the group was working on this one map, as I was basically putting marks down, but the group, it was a very heavily group effort, and it was a back and forth of going through the data and then looking through the reading, and it was just a wonderful experience. So one of the points is, it was remarked in the story that they were 300 miles off the coast. So what this mapping tool allow the students to do is, like, we put this red dot, this red circle is a probable area of where they were. And then once those things start to, you know, add up, you start to see a more fleshed out picture of what happened. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a yellow tint in a circle around it. And that was one of the remarkable things that we kind of discovered just in looking at and mapping just those 7 rows of the analysis that AJ did. And I think Hoda can speak to what we found just initially a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, this was an Algerian pirate ship that had gotten into a fight with this English ship and captured the sailors. But the thing is, they mention in passing that this same ship then attacked 2 other ships. But until we mapped it, we didn't realize that essentially this Algerian ship was not just sort of in this southern part of the Atlantic. It was really operating all up and down that seaboard. So that's why Trent sort of added that yellow tint, because there was a ship that was captured that was going between the English Channel and Ireland, right? So, right, that it kind of gives you a sense of, oh, these are not just like sort of right off these were really seafaring pirates who are going quite far in their attacks, which was something I hadn't realized even as, you know, the person who assigned the text before.
Just want to make sure we are at the 10-minute mark, but I'm going to go on to the next slide. I definitely want to give you guys a chance to finish.
I will talk really quickly. This class won't be taught until spring 2021. And so our plan is our semester will finish up around Thanksgiving. Hoda is going to check in with all of us in October and set up a time so that we're not on vacation when we meet in December and continue to work on some of this stuff. And we also started a document this morning of what are the next steps, so that when we come back to this and we've forgotten all about it after the semester, we know where we need to jump back in and start working. So Hodo is going to read through the primary sources again and narrow it down, having an experience like this with the workshop, being able to read those texts differently for this assignment. Trent and I will continue to look at mapping layers that we could add in. And then there will also be fleshing out the assignments, the rubrics, and the syllabus.
Yeah, and this is just a link to the assignment that we've been drafting. So that's for your perusal. But thank you guys.
Awesome. Great work. Okay, we're going to move on to Mapping Cicero's Letters. Micah Myers, Joe Murphy, and Alex Alderton.
There. So yeah, this has been a great experience, and it's great to learn about all the different sorts of mapping projects that are happening around the Ohio 5. We can go to the next slide, please. We accomplished some of our goals for the week. We're happy with the environmental scan we did of other tools that are out there, although I'm sure there's still more. We did spend some time talking about sustainability, and we decided to push the accessibility for when we get closer to teaching the project again. We were able to get back into some of these additional features like the timeline a little bit. And then we also did evaluate our workflows and documentation, and we made them available on the project website. We can go to the next slide. Our learning objectives in this project, we see 3 primary ones: increased facility with tabular data, increased facility with data visualization and digital mapping, and then increased knowledge of the ancient Mediterranean and its geography and history in a Roman context. As we've worked on this, and we'll talk about, in a sense, we're thinking about ways to expand the project, to add in elements rather than replace our use of Carto. And so how these 3 complementary priorities will work, I think that's something that we continue to talk about. It continues to evolve. And Joe pointed out that perhaps that's a good thing as we're 4 or 5 years into this project to continue to think about what are our goals in doing this. And I've linked to our assignment and workflow from the most recent iteration, but I don't think we need to go through that necessarily. It's a little,
sorry.
There's a couple pages there. No problem. But yeah, we can move on to the next slide. But in case it's of interest or use to anyone. So we can go to the next slide, please. Great. So the way we assess the students is a series of scaffolded assignments. We start with this initial simple map that Joe leads them through an introduction to Carto, and they map where they consider home and their journey to Kenyan. And then again, as they're creating their data set, there's a sort of an assessment that occurs when they find out whether it's able to visualize or not, and then they can use us as resources. And then there's the next required map from their original data set, and then the encouragement to customize the map. And then it culminates in a presentation and a written report, some about the map, but also where they've investigated the letters and the context and some of the places that are mentioned more. So they're all connected assignments. And that's how, and we see sort of various check-ins there. All right, we can go to the next slide, please. So we're continuing to use Carto, but of the different tools that are out there that we explored, we had some good success with Flourish. Flourish does a variety of different types of data visualization, including other types of sort of digital maps that we want to explore further. But one thing that we were interested in that we did have success with is a network chart. And I would actually, if we could click on that network chart prototype, please. This is again Joe's work here. And so here we've taken some student data and done it in this network chart that represents the magnitude of the frequency that places are mentioned. There's Rome in the center. But I was also interested in this because the students spent some time in the course looking at the different ways that ancient Greeks and Romans conceptualized geographical space. And it was most often not in the way that we do it, in that sort of cartographic perspective. So this sort of network representation of the links between places, it perhaps could offer a way to discuss the different ways that, or visualize different ways that, people in different societies would represent or think about geographic space. We also were interested in exploring doing something like this with social networks of addressee, recipient, other people mentioned. So far, we haven't had the students record the other people that are mentioned in the letters, but that is certainly something that could be easy to add into their data. And as Joe's pointing out there, Flourish is pretty easy to use. Even I was almost able to create a visualization on my own without consulting Joe, but then there were some things that were necessary to do it. But it was a pretty quick learning curve. All right, we can go back to the slides, please. And then finally, we're also thinking about perhaps incorporating story maps. We looked back at that again, the new versions that have come out since the last time we looked at it. But using story maps as a way for students to embed anything they create in Carto or Flourish, and also to incorporate the written aspect of the assignment, which so far has been sort of a separate feature, and that could be another way that their work could be all incorporated together and presented. Next slide, please. So our next steps here, we are not going to teach the project again until the 21-22 academic year, so we have some time. As I mentioned, we will definitely want to evaluate accessibility. And also, since we were thinking about ways to expand the project here, we want to think more about, I want to spend some time thinking about how it integrates into the course as a whole, and what other projects related to cartography and geographical thinking might be added into the course, what other assignments might be streamlined in order to give a little bit more time to this project over the second half of the course the next time it's taught. Other steps is our plan going forward is to set up regular project meetings so we can continue to work on these things and to keep up the momentum from this week. And also to explore funding options, despite the particular challenges of that in this current environment, for hiring a student research assistant, which is something we've been able to do in the past and we'd like to think about doing again. Some of the things we'd be interested in doing is having them evaluate the feasibility of doing a version of the project in ArcGIS or Flourish, and also exploring more, adding in timeline and other sorts of filtering to our visualizations. Next slide, please. So here we just, Joe created a great document explaining how he created that network chart. Some of it is specific to reformatting the data for our project, but I think it could be pretty easily translated into anyone else's interest. And then we've also linked to our documentation for Carto. And even if like some of the specifics of what we're doing in the project isn't relevant to you, Joe put together a nice intro to Carto, so you too can make a map from your home to your institution. in 15 minutes or less.
That's tremendous. I saw Eugene put a thank you in there too, because I know Flourish was something I think their team looked at as well. But yeah, that's great documentation. Thank you so much.
So yeah, and so I'm certainly, if Joe or Alex want to jump in and add anything, please do. But otherwise, that's the end of our presentation.
Just from my own perspective, it's not really the Codex project, but this has been useful for me in thinking about the Center for Innovative Pedagogy and some of the things that really aren't specific to this project, but have to do with the way that we're doing support for this kind of project across the curriculum. So there's already been a little bit of a spillover as I do some of my reflective learning on the project. In terms of what we're going to be able to accomplish at Kenyon. So I just wanted to acknowledge and thank you for that opportunity.
For me, this has been mostly one of the reasons this is valuable is I'm a very late comer to the project. And so as we've been reevaluating things, I've also been sort of figuring out things that Joe and Micah have done throughout the different iterations of it. And I think that the way that we've put together documentation is not only going to help students in the project, but I think student workers or other people in the CIP or other kinds of staff to get on board more rapidly. So I think this has been very useful in terms of kind of streamlining our workflow going forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's really encouraging to hear, all of those comments. Remind me, I saw Micah, we wanted to talk about Scalar when we get to the discussion period. Let me also just put a bookmark here for talking about funding for student research or any funding kind of related questions for projects that pass through Codex once we get to the end. So make sure we cover that. Okay, thank you very much. Awesome, again. Okay, moving on to the Artifact project from the Oberlin team, Abby Aresti, Larissa Fakit, and Abe Rashad.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much first to Ben and Heather for this incredible week. It's been just amazing, and we're so grateful for all of your organizing, and to everyone. I know I speak for the whole team when I say that we've learned so much from all of you, from your projects and from your questions. So the Artifact project, as you know, is a storytelling project and making project, both digital and sort of tangible technologies. And it's about bringing together international students, ESOL students, to with local community members and Kendall retirement community to tell stories and share stories around objects. It's a project that ties to 2 classes, so we're going to actually be talking a little bit about both of those classes in the context of this presentation. So you could go to the next slide. So Larissa kindly redrafted my original very wordy goals to something a little bit more concrete here, and we've been working on all of them through the course of the week. We basically tackled 1 per day, knowing that that would mean that we would have to circle back on them. So Larissa will speak a little bit more to what we've been thinking about in terms of transitioning the fall Artifact course to remote instruction. I can say that we brainstormed quite a lot about technologies and have several that we're prototyping and testing with the understanding that some of our students are going to be in China and other places around the world where some of these technologies, accessibility becomes a real issue. So that's something that we're looking at, as well as we've been thinking a lot about the different types of projects and prompts that we want to incorporate in addition to this, sharing the story about the object. And we're really excited about some of the ones around recipes and postcards and different things like that that help to build out this sort of framework, community building framework of the project. So doing that both within a course and also with community partners. We've been similarly reimagining some of the activities for the spring project launch. So we definitely thought about the ways in which these 2 courses relate to each other, and thinking about the fall course is really more about students it's almost like a first year seminar geared specifically towards international students, a module class. And then the second class is more towards the community aspect. And so we thought about ways to bring those two together with some of these additional prompts that we've been working on. And again, we run into some of the technology challenges because in addition to working with international students who may not have access to certain things abroad, we're also working with the Kendall residents, some of whom have different levels of comfort with different types of technologies. So trying to figure out how to make the project so that the technology doesn't become a barrier to participation. So along those lines, as I've alluded to, we have been looking at lots of different types of technologies from the ones that we've already been addressing, and we talk about it a little bit later, so I won't go into it in detail now, but we have a few different that we're experimenting with. And have been sort of redrafting the structure of the syllabus over the course of the week, and thinking I know there was assessment in there somewhere. We've been also thinking about assessment, sort of assessment of the project in particular, as well as sort of more traditional assessments, and defining the project mission statement. We have several drafts that we haven't decided on, but we move forward with that. So you can go to the next slide. I'll turn it over to Larissa to talk about the learning objectives.
Thank you, Abby. And I just want to echo Abby's sentiment of gratitude. This week has been so helpful. All of your contributions and workshops and discussions and questions has helped us really think about our project and take it to the next level. So as Abby said, we have 2 courses for the artifact that involve the artifact project. And both of them are at very different levels. One is at an advanced level and one is an intermediate level. But in looking at the upcoming syllabus and drafting a framework for instruction this fall, we decided that they both have really common goals. Continue to use artifact as the basis of project-based learning. And in that, it gives the students the space to really work on their communicative competence, to practice their language skills. And as they're doing that, and participating in the project, they're able to create this sense of belonging, whether it's to the bigger Oberlin community or even on-campus connections. And then also that we want them to learn to use these digital technologies in order to also have multimodal forms of storytelling as they are talking about their artifact and building these connections. We can go to the next slide. So in thinking about assessment, we really decided that the assessment for the project is very different than the assessment for the courses that the students are in. So for the project, we wanted the students to feel very free in order to make a connection with someone, whether it's on campus or to someone at the Kendall community. We want them to feel like it's a very open and not, we don't want them to have any academic pressure attached to that. So for the project, we really were going to use to assess our reflections that they have. We also get them involved in setting up their individual goals that they want to achieve throughout the project. And we actually decided during this week that we were going to instill kind of these optional challenges for them throughout the project. For example, they could start with maybe just forming their own question to continue a conversation in small talk, up to speaking in a larger group, or even reaching out to a Kendall resident of their own volition to contact them for a meeting. So keeping that all kind of separate, even though they're so intertwined. And then within the course, I would continue some traditional assessment of their linguistic skills, which would include them doing a presentation of a proposal for artifact and also doing a written report about their exchanges. And with that, we can hand it back over to Abby.
Okay. We have many different technologies that we use in the course of this project, some of which are more or less relevant to the current context. So we have, and we'll look at it, we'll show you a little bit later, a main Google site where we have most of the information about the project, sort of an overview, a little video that Ivy and one of our, another one that one of our previous research assistants put together, as well as the actual digital exhibit, which is hosted in Omeka, and several other resources that we'll look at later. So normally we use Zoom recorders, so another kind of Zoom. So it's these like field recorders that I'm sure many of you are familiar with to record audio. And we edit in this Reaper digital audio workstation. It's kind of like if people have used Audacity or something like that, it's a little bit more bells and whistles in there, and this programming language that we've used in the actual exhibit, as well as Abe kind of has been our 3D printer. He has many 3D printers going all at once when this project goes. The language lab becomes a little factory. So we will likely, of course, have to do the audio or the storytelling, the story sharing, the recording over Zoom. And I've been working on a different project, an oral history project over Zoom, and found it is terrifying relying on Zoom for audio recording, because we all know how it can drop out in the middle. And if you're, doing a longer interview, that's a very scary thing. So in that context, we've been using Zencaster. You can find it online, and it records on your side, right? It records the audio on your side. It's a little, I don't know if it will work for this context, because it's a little bit, like I said, the challenge of getting it set up may or may not make it that something you can explore different possibilities. In particular, moving along to sort of some of these more, these different types of ways of thinking about storytelling, and these different technological platforms. We've been thinking about how to expand the project so that it's not just a story about an object, but it's about like making a story together. So the story about the object is like maybe a starting point or one of a couple of starting points to facilitate conversation. But we thought of Scalar or Google Sites or something as a way of compiling these different digital artifacts to, again, make it feel like really you don't just have this one tangible object, but you actually have this collection of objects that are somehow then something that the resident and the student have built together. We thought about story map as well, but we're honestly, we thought of we've talked about WeChat, we talked about lots of different things, just from the accessibility standpoint. But yeah, so right now we're hopeful about Scalar as kind of our top thing right now, but we're going to experiment. So I guess the next steps.
Just to say we are at the 10-minute mark, but I definitely
okay.
want to give you the time for this one.
Yeah, then we can, we can skip the next steps. We're just to say we have many different things, and we've divided them up very well, and based on our work plans in the past and revising IRP syllabi. And then the last slide is just our website, where we have many resources that you're welcome to check out, like different guides. There's, in addition to those two little subheadings, you can also go under the resources tab on top, and you'll see different trainings for using the Zoom recorders, for using Reaper, for the 3D printing, and then the exhibit is also on there, so you can see. So there's a video, and then so we always have like a presentation and a multimodal teaching, I guess you could say. And then you can see some of our first exhibit in there. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you for keeping us on track.
No, it's great. And we figured I was going to go over a little bit, but this is so interesting. We want to give you time to cover that. So yeah, great. Okay. Oops. Thank you very much. That's awesome. I know the remoteness of our situation is particularly challenging there. So that it's been exciting to see how you guys have worked through that or are working through that. Okay, moving on to using digital maps to teach Silk Roads, Religion, Empires, and Globalization in the Ancient World. Mark Graham and Emily Armour.
Okay, thank you. While you are looking at that title slide, I'll add my thanks to, as others have, to Ben and Heather and everyone in this workshop. I especially wish to thank Emily Armour, my partner in this. All of the EdTech, IT, and librarians at Worcester have their plates so full And Emily got into this project by drawing the short straw, and has been a really gracious partner. You can ponder that for a minute. You will be listening to me for 5 or 6 minutes. She has had to listen to me for hours this week. And that's no small thing. Anything you see in this presentation where you look at it and you think, well, that looks pretty lucid and possible, that's the result of Emily making sense of things she has listened to me talk about. Anything you look at in here where you think, well, that seems pretty sketchy, that's still me. So anyway, this project, this course, this is a fall course that starts in a month, is part of the bigger CODEX project where I want to build mapping and visual tools across the Asian studies curriculum that I have. This example is the test case because spatial and visual thinking is absolutely essential to understanding this topic, and it is a very difficult example. These were our goals for this week. I realize we didn't put on them like, have we done these? I think we have reasonably well defined some of the goals in a realistic context, and chose mapping tools, and were working out draft assignments. So I think we're okay there. I was trying to be careful. I only chose 3 goals for the week because I thought it was possible. You can go on to the next slide, Ben. Okay, so learning objectives. These are a nested set of objectives, starting with the biggest one, which is the overall objectives of the course. This is a religious studies course, and so questions about religions are in the foreground. And then within that, there is a big case study, which is Silk Road cultural dynamics. You're getting these at sort of a large level. And then within that, there is an argument, you might say, built into these learning goals, which is that you cannot understand 1 and 2 without using number 3. Number 3 is not just kind of an optional way of getting at the understanding of 2 and 1, but that it's an essential way of doing that. You can't actually understand this subject without engaging in visual and spatial learning. And then 4 is improving understanding of that by trying to do it, by trying to engage in various kinds of mapping exercises. We can go on to the next slide. So there's a set of, these are sample tasks that lead up to and into the digital learning tasks. They're not the entire assessments of the course. But it starts with a really simple imagination exercise that were I doing it in person, it would begin with hand drawing. That if I ask people to imagine what does the phrase Silk Roads mean, or what's in your mind, is to ask people to try to conceptualize that in words and conceptualize that in images, and to use that as you might say as a kind of pretest. What did you walk in the room or the digital room with? A second thing, these first 2 would happen very early in the course, is to begin to engage students with the process of thinking with and thinking about maps specific to the Silk Road. Any learning or reading or study that anyone does on Silk Road cultures is always being shown with maps. And those are often just accepted as is. And so we're creating a kind of comparative assignment to look at, to examine different varieties of Silk Road maps and to assess their strengths, to begin to think about how they communicate different kinds of things to persons. Along the way, there is also, I guess, I would love to have a better term for it, but basically it's a quiz, it's a map quiz, but it would be a kind of self-paced reiterative quiz where students are teaching themselves the information that would go on maps, and that they can work on that as much as they wish until they master it. So it wouldn't be so much like you have to memorize this and then show me you can put it on a map, but just to practice, in a sense, putting information on maps. And then there are the two create things are case studies of creating digital maps. One of those, create a map of small textual example, a micro case study. So as the course goes along, we are studying textual examples. We've had discussion already today of how these things might work. And what I'll be asking pairs of students to do is I will assign them to the pair and to the task and say, go back into that textual example, extract the geolocational data, and create a story map on that. That will have, as has been said in previous, some work at visualization and mapping, and some work at writing analysis of that in a paired way. And then the other digital assignment is a little more open-ended, but where a student would, or a pair of students would identify a question that had come up in the course and then try to think about a way that that question could be answered by means of a map or some kind of data visualization. And then that would be assessed significantly by how well, you might say, or how successfully you felt you thought through matching the question to the tool. So those are the kinds of assignments. There's another one I'm thinking about, which is not on here, which would be really at the end of the course to come back to an example, a contemporary example of someone using really the fancy ArcGIS story maps tool to present a Silk Road journey, and have the students both begin to see what a very sophisticated tool looks like, but also begin to assess how it was made. We're using rather elementary things here, StoryMap.js and NatGeo MapMaker Interactive, for example. And ideally, it would be good if students use both of those, but that will be part of the discussion with them. We can go to the next slide. So this has been discussed a little bit already in what I just said. We do need to create and put together documentation and show models. We're working on that, so I don't have something to show you right now. And then these are a little, some of the next steps. Like I said, this thing starts in a month. We're trying to deal with the realities of, in the next steps, the realities of what the teaching could look like, migrate as much of this as possible to our Moodle LMS platform, and prepare the documentation and the models for students. I'll stop there. I don't know if Emily wants to get in and say something here, or if she's happy sitting this moment out. And yeah, we'll share that, so stay tuned. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I was giving Emily a chance.
Oh,
I saw
sorry.
your comment. That's okay.
No, I did put a comment in the chat about my nefarious plan. And to be honest, y'all, we all know we're heading into fall 2020. And even the nice conversations Mark and I have had that many of you are already having is, how do we like super duper ramp up some of the ways that we can do some of this regular work digitally? And Mark has excellent examples of using paper and pencils and the thinking processes that go through making those decisions about maybe creating a hand-drawn map. But we need to maybe push ourselves through less paper touching, even if we're in a face-to-face environment, and more digital annotating of those texts that we may have done on paper, or allowing them to take photographs and submit those as opposed to handing in the paper. The quizzing, the self-paced stuff in the LMS. I mean, there's just a whole, we've already talked about the difference in the fall 2020, but man, we really have to dig down into some of the nitty-gritty of some of this to make this be deep thinking for students and not driving everyone insane in terms of, you know, assessment. That's all.
Great. Thank you for sharing. It's so interesting to see all the connections between these. I mean, even Debbie made a comment too, just this idea of, you know, starting with paper and pencil. I know Stephanie has you know, a similar approach as well in her class. I don't want to steal the thunder, but just really interesting connections that we didn't really expect. Okay, thank you very much, Mark and Emily. It's fantastic. I'm managing 3 devices. I've got a timer here. I've got Zoom, so I'm doing my best. Doing my best to be a digital, whatever I am in my generation, immigrant, native, I don't know. Okay, moving on. Speaking of Stephanie, I'm going to move on to Reason and Romanticism Reimagined. Stephanie Merkel, Eugene Modigliano, and Calvin Cleary from Ohio Wesleyan.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
I probably would retitle this at this point. Maybe it should be Reason and Romanticism Rebooted. I just want to say at the beginning, thank you to Ben and Heather and all of you. I'm a newbie in many ways to the digital ecosystem. So I'm really excited. This week has been really energizing for me. I've gotten to see a lot of what's possible that I didn't know is possible. So thank you very much. I want to say, first of all, a little bit about how my idea or impulse to add a digital project to my course occurred. So next slide. I've been teaching this course, Reason and Romanticism, for 2 decades, and it was taught for 20 years before I came. So it's a course that's has a long life on our campus. It's sort of the 18th century literature and thought course. My students in the last 5 years have been consumers of digital projects in sort of the ecosystem of 18th century studies and digital projects, but we've never created a digital project of our own. So we've been using, for example, this is a map of human knowledge that is in the preface to the 18th century encyclopedia of Diderot and d'Alembert, a 28-volume work, an 18th century attempt to map all of human knowledge. So we've worked with the digital version of this encyclopedia for the last 5 years. It's been fantastic for us throughout our course as a way of getting students into the thinking of the 18th century. And what's really important for me in our digital project for the course is that there is a real resonance and connection between the subject matter of the course and sort of the digital platform that we chose and so forth. So I didn't want it just to be sort of an add-on, but that it would be part and parcel, really integrated into sort of the goals of the course, and a resonance between sort of 18th century thinking and 21st century thinking. So next slide. Our goals for the week were ambitious. We did identify our specific platform, and that changed. So it was very fun during Janine's presentation to realize that actually I didn't so much want to map the networks of women's letters to each other, but I wanted really to maybe use her model of infectious disease more, more than the Ben Franklin model of letter writing networks, because this project is really addresses a problem I had in my course, which was that the course did not adequately represent women's contributions. And I really wanted to get the students to understand women's, not just their contributions, their written published works, but I wanted them to really get inside women's networks during this time period and understand the non-published contributions of women. And that's how letter writing became the center focus of this digital project. So I'm still in the process of revising my existing syllabus, and that's something that is in progress. But we did manage to look at how we would integrate the in-class instruction for application of the digital tool, in-class instruction of databases and digital archives. So thanks to Eugene and to Calvin, who have been amazingly patient and helpful this week. I'm also still developing assessment rubrics for the projects, but that's in progress, and I'm feeling much better about it. And also thinking about how this project will survive in the course. So I realize I was very ambitious in my proposal, and so this time through, we have tried to define clearly sort of where we want to content.
Sorry.
And oh, that's okay. The course content and the digital tool that we're using in the digital project is Ben back? Yeah, okay. But my, oops.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks. I completely lost connection. I'm glad you didn't.
There we go. So we're back, okay. So in our learning objectives, this was an area that I think we made a lot of progress in. So for me, it's really important that the students are having the experience of sort of the drama of Enlightenment thought. That is to say that they are embedded in it. And so the project does that because each student will be assigned a female letter writer, and that they will inhabit and be responsible for during the project. And they will be responsible for a page on our Scalar project for posting and annotating those letters. So my learning objectives are that the students will inhabit and model the drama of Enlightenment thought through collaborative authoring and commentary. And that's where our Scalar comes in. I think there's a real synergy between the Scalar project and my goals to teach them analytical thinking. That is, how to set a question, how to gather data and make inferences and interpret the data. We're having them create tags within our projects, tags within their letters that I think will help them to learn, the importance of key concepts, examine their assumptions, and also to, at the end of the project and at the end of the course, to think about the implications and consequences of their reasoning. One of the things that I didn't rank very high when you asked us to rank learning objectives was modeling for the students some sort of behavior. But after I thought about it during the week, this is something I think is really important, and that is modeling sort of what we think of it as the intellectual virtues, intellectual empathy. So having the students really inhabit these letter writers and try to get inside their thinking and understand it. Intellectual humility, which this week I'm experiencing a lot of, which is, realizing, there's a lot I don't know. And I think it's good for the students to begin the project by thinking about, I may be wrong about the 18th century. I may be wrong about my assumptions. I think courage is a virtue that I want to encourage during this digital project. It takes courage for me. I'm very inexperienced, so I want to communicate to the students that it's great to try new things, to be adventurous. Autonomy, I think this particular project requires them to develop that virtue of working autonomously, cooperating, but also a lot of the work is done autonomously. Integrity, perseverance, and fair-mindedness.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Stephanie, especially since you've already been interrupted, but we are at a little bit past the 10-minute mark.
Oh, sorry, I'll hurry.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Okay.
I
also want to explore the students to explore the relevance of 18th century studies for understanding 21st century problems. And I think the digital project is really important for this. We still have issues of, women's voices needing to be heard. And so I think that there's a real resonance between our letter project in the Scalar form and those questions of women's participation, women's voices, and so women's networks. I want them to read major works of 18th century literature and actively research and restore underrepresented participants and forms of participation in the cultural age. Next slide. For assessment, I'm going to have them write an initial student letter to themselves. So it's a week one letter to one's week 15 self, so that they can lay out sort of what they envision in the beginning, and then write a final reflection paper and a letter to their back to their week one self at the end of the course. I think part of the formative assessment will also be a survey of expertise at the beginning. A lot of the letters are written in other languages originally. So a survey of expertise, linguistic expertise, digital expertise will be important. I envision weekly 15-minute salons, or sort of rapid sessions where we share a single letter and mark those up together. Or I was discussing with Eugene sampling a digital project, so related to a reading that we're doing, because I think it's important for them to also see what other people are doing in 18th century studies with their digital projects.
I think we might have to wrap up. We have about only about 12 minutes left in our hour and a half, and I know we have one more team.
Yeah.
So
sorry to
our
cut you
team, I'll say our team probably will not need the full 10.
Oh.
So I think feel free to jump in, other teammates here, but I think we can cede a little bit of our time.
Thanks. Sorry about that. I kind of lost my train of thought.
It's okay. I just want to make sure we have.
Maybe I'll hand it over to Eugene so he can say something about our next slide, real quick.
Okay.
Yep, sure. So very quickly, we've decided to use Scalar for the epistolary project. We're going to be taking advantage of its annotation and markup tools to allow students to demonstrate their analysis of the letters and the content of those. We're also going to try to, as much as possible, utilize the architecture of Scalar to develop visualizations and other navigation options for users to understand how the letters are related, both by topic and by author, and then possibly implement hypothesis as another layer of annotation for students to comment on each other's work and maybe provide reflections on the letters that they've analyzed. So we still need to develop a template for analysis and markup of the letter text that we can provide to students. We are going to be, over the next 2 weeks or so, developing a hierarchy of descriptive tags and methods by which we can input metadata for the letters themselves in the Scalar system, and also think through how we want everything to be organized, both through visualizations and the pathing that Scalar provides. Next slide I'll get to really quickly. This is just a couple screenshots of the test set that we put together with some example text, some possibilities for how annotations could be implemented, as well as other enhancements like adding media connections, as well as a screenshot to the right here, which is of a kind of small topic chart that utilizes Scalar's tagging functions to start to provide new pathways through a lot of the content and letters of the site. Next slide. Stephanie, do you want to talk through this part?
I think since we're running out of time, I'll just let people read it, if that's okay, and so we can keep on time. But thank you, everyone, for just being a great inspiration for me this week. It was great to meet you.
Thank you so much. It's interesting too to see that project kind of twist and turn in the week in terms of looking at the platforms. So that's pretty exciting. Okay, I think sorry again for the interruption there. My connection just died, but we'll move on to the last team: Worcester, Katie Holt, Jen Hayward, Zach Sharrow, Annie Dempsey, and Megan Smesnick.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to be taking the lead on this, but team members feel free to, jump in, or I may appeal to you at various times throughout. So reviewing the goals that we set for ourselves all the way back on Monday, which feels like a very long time ago. We were able to, I think, meet and actually exceed a few of these. So we definitely have a different focus than some of the other projects. So the idea here was to create sort of self-contained training modules that would sort of introduce the idea of data and working with data and using data, specifically with a little bit more of a focus toward humanities students, and these would be kind of very, very low intro level. And so what we ended up with here at the end of the week is one module that is more or less content complete, miraculously somehow, and some ideas for where we would go with future modules. So I think we can go to the next slide. And so for this very, very first module, and these are more learning outcomes than they are objectives, but you can see that this is very basic. We want this to be an introduction to, for students to just start thinking about data, how it's presented and how it's used by others before they start to think about using it themselves. So really what we have is kind of a two-part Moodle lesson that gets them thinking about data and types of data, and then ask them to do some simple assessment on a data source. We'll see a little bit more about that later in the presentation. And for future modules, I just included a couple of examples of the types of learning outcomes we would be moving toward for the foundational set of modules. Assessments for us look much more short and self-contained. So as students work through these lessons in Moodle, there are points where we sort of stop and review and do a check and ask them to kind of apply what we've introduced. So we go through the kind of assessment questions as an example. We take a data source and say, here are the key questions to think about, here are kind of the answers for this data source, and then ask them to apply those to another example kind of their choosing. We have a couple of examples for them to pick from and apply that on their own. I think we'll go to the next slide. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's on Moodle. Yeah, so one of the best parts about having this opportunity to work as a team has just been to figure out the workflow and figure out how we're assembling these things and where we're putting them and how to kind of make them work in a way that'll be accessible and friendly for students. So there's a couple of examples of what this actually looks like in Moodle. So this is, I think, most of one of the segments that just kind of explains and gives a little bit of information about types of data. And then the next slide is a review question, one of our review questions. And so you can see this is the kind of level of learning outcome and level of assessment that we're working on for these. And so the idea is that this would be something that could be used in a variety of classes to sort of get students up to speed. And then the kind of ultimate assessments would be within, would be baked in within the class itself. And these would just be a section of that course, right? So we have, like I said, that first module, that very basic introduction. I don't want to say done, but everything that's in there that we want to put in there is ready to go, I think. And so the next steps for us would be to continue on down that path, building some more of those self-contained modules. And once they've reached maturity, to find ways to share them out. So they can be shared within Worcester's Moodle pretty easily, but we'd also want to get them accessible to people that use other LMSs or that are on other campuses. So it links here to our lesson outline, which is what we used to build the content before we placed it in Moodle. Annie had a very helpful, useful kind of a framework for that. and just the example data sources that we chose to use as the introductory kind of stuff for the module. Yeah. Teammates, anything to add?
It was just such a great opportunity to work together on this, to draw on all the various expertise from librarians and faculty and ed tech support, and really get a sense of how we can use this kind of really powerful module example moving forward in our teaching. So thank you.
Yeah, it was wonderful to work as a team and together with librarians and faculty really think about what the fall might look like for us and how we want to keep the building blocks very, very simple so that they can be used flexibly. So for example, I'll use this foundational building block to build towards a digital process or project in my fall course. But the idea that they can be shared across faculty and across institutions, I think is great. Yeah, and one thing Heather's pointed out in the comments is that there's a separate conversation about doing kind of statistics and data education in a modularized way at Worcester. So dovetails nicely with that.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up our presentations. We have like 3 minutes, so not a whole lot of time for discussion, unfortunately. I think that's maybe one of our lessons learned, and maybe an extra half an hour. It just felt like the time seemed right, but you know, we'll learn. But based on the comments I'm seeing in the chat and just the remarks, I'm hearing that it sounded like it's been overall a pretty good experience. Exhausting, I'm sure, but a pretty good experience. I guess I'll just ask one, maybe reflection question, and then I'll make a couple comments. I know we probably don't have time to talk too much about Scalar, although I'm always happy, and I know maybe others here as well. I know, Micah, that was of particular interest to you. I'm happy to meet separately to talk about Scalar. We also conduct a series of workshops. I think we may be doing one in the fall. I'll look over at Eugene virtually for a second to see if he's on board with that, but happy to share about that as well. And and not time for discussion, could we post some links to interesting Scalar projects? Absolutely, yes, there are many. We can certainly do that. I guess I wanted to make one comment before I ask a general question about I think Micah also mentioned funding. As part of the overall Codex project, one of the other elements of the project is this concept of microgrants that are available the idea with the microgrants is that there's relatively small amounts that are available, by application, by request. Of course, we haven't had any because this is the first time we're going through the Institute, but for projects that pass through the Institute, specifically for things like hiring, student research assistants to help continue developing that course, to get it to a place where it's ready to go. We haven't done this yet. So other than many of the other kind of grant-funded requests we've made before. So I don't know that I can say we have a crystal clear process, but we will be sharing that more with you all in short order. And that may be an option for those who are looking for that opportunity. I guess I'll just, I don't want to go too far beyond here, but just maybe a wrap-up question here. I think Heather and I are probably just curious about how this experience this week lined up with your expectations for this week, coming into it. We're curious if the experience met them, exceeded them, if there were things you were really wanting that we didn't get a chance to cover. I'd just be curious about maybe some last thoughts as we conclude the week, just to hear from you. And of course, we're happy to take those offline too, but if someone has a comment they'd be willing to make, that'd be great. Miss the in-person interactions. Absolutely. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Great. Oh, good. I have a couple Zoom-based conferences now. This one worked. Okay, great. Well, again, I don't want to take too much time. We tried to record these. We thought they might be useful as a reference later on. There'll be other opportunities too to provide your thoughts in a post assessment that I know Missy will be sharing. And what we'd like to do as well, and I think Hoda's team might have mentioned this already, what we have planned to do is to provide an opportunity for actually this whole cohort to meet once again in the fall for maybe like the same amount of time that we met maybe for that orientation, just to actually look at those next steps and see like how things have gone between right now and that place, needing to find the right time, especially in light of the fall that's coming. But sometime around mid-fall to see if there are things that people are still needing help moving forward, and just trying to see how things are going with the projects, keeping each other informed. Any other last thoughts, Heather, or anyone that we want to share? I think this is actually from the perspective of expectations. I think my expectations have been exceeded. Actually, hearing your projects, I'm actually super inspired, and this is awesome.
By the way, I gleaned all the links from the PowerPoint slides and put them in the master link of links.
That's great.
So that you can find everyone's really helpful resources. And I'm really appreciative for all of those.
And by the way, the Slack workspace will continue to be open for as far as Slack, as long as Slack exists. We hope that future cohorts that come through Codex will also join that and create a larger and larger community. So we'd love to have everyone keep sharing and keep asking questions in there. Okay, well, I won't delay us any longer from lunch and from our from finishing up our last session. So thank you all very much. It's been an extremely long week, but really rewarding, and I'm really happy to see this and how everything worked out. So thank you all, and take care. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all soon on the webs.
Thanks all.
Thanks
everyone.
everyone.
Good luck this fall to everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.